Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India News Hour, India's voice to the world. I'm Mark Lynn. Namaskar. Coming up in the next hour. President Macron welcomes Prime Minister Modi as G7 plus outreach leaders meet in Avian. The G7 commits to modernizing development finance, boosting resilience, capital and support for vulnerable partner countries. Prime Minister Modi interacts with world leaders as the G7 summit. It also is promoting deeper engagement across continents. Trump says Iran deal to be public soon and will rule out nuclear weapon for Tehran. Iran's deputy foreign minister says the US naval blockade is lifted. And European Union lawmakers clear trade deal with the United States to avert the return to trade conflict. World leaders have gathered in Avion-les-Bains, which is in France, for the Group of Seven summit, with the French President Emmanuel Macron welcoming Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the G7 summit venue on Tuesday. President Macron has picked the lakeside town of Avion-les-Bains. This is nestled at the foot of the Alps on the Lake Geneva to host this year's G7 meeting. Global leaders have gathered at this French lakeside resort for the high-stakes 52nd G7 summit. It runs from June 15 to 17. Leaders gathered for a group photograph ahead of the outreach session at Avion-les-Bains, and for the 52nd G7 summit in Avion-les-Bains, France had also invited India, Brazil, Egypt, Kenya, South Korea, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Ukraine and the UAE as outreach partner countries. At the beginning of the outreach session, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the US President Donald Trump met on the sidelines and they interacted with each other. Prime Minister Modi participated in the outreach session on forging new partnerships and rebuilding international solidarity during the G7 summit. Addressing global leaders, Prime Minister underscored the importance of trust as the foundation of building strong international partnerships in an increasingly interconnected world. The Prime Minister emphasized the need to move beyond the traditional donor-recipient framework and foster partnerships based on solidarity, mutual respect and equality. Highlighting India's commitment to global welfare, Prime Minister Modi said the country's humanity-first approach is reflected in several international initiatives, including the International Solar Alliance, Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, Global Biofuel Alliance, Mission Life, and Ek Ped Maa Ke Naam campaign. The Prime Minister noted that India's vision of international cooperation is rooted in the timeless philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The world is one family. Reaffirming India's role as a responsible global partner, the Prime Minister conveyed that India remains firmly committed to advancing sustainable, inclusive and people-centric global development. G7 leaders in Avian, with the support from partner countries, which include India, have called for a strong and coordinated global response to the re-emerging global outbreak of Ebola in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo and Uganda. Actually, it's limited only to Africa. The leaders expressed solidarity with affected communities and stressed the urgent need to contain the outbreak through enhanced surveillance, contact tracing, testing, quarantine measures and also cross-border cooperation. The G7 pledged support for the rapid development and deployment of vaccines, diagnostics and treatments, while mobilizing additional financial, technical and humanitarian assistance. Leaders also called on the wider international community as well as private sector to contribute resources and strengthen preparedness efforts. The statement underscored the importance of coordinated action, improved humanitarian access and regional stability to prevent further spread of the virus and also to protect global health security. At the 2026 G7 summit in Avignon, the G7 leaders, they joined the partner countries, including India, and they have pledged also to step up the global fight against cancer, which currently claims nearly 10 million lives annually. So the leaders committed, in fact, to strengthening international research cooperation, improving cancer prevention, screening, early diagnosis and treatment, and accelerating scientific innovation. Key priorities include expanding global data sharing for pediatric, adolescent and young adult cancers, intensifying research on hard-to-treat cancers, increasing early-stage diagnosis, and also significantly reducing lung cancer deaths over the next decade. The declaration also calls for stronger health systems, wider access to quality cancer care, and the responsible use of digital technologies, artificial intelligence as well, and quantum research to improve patient outcomes. The leaders said that progress on these commitments will be regularly reviewed. And Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who is in Avignon-les-Bains in France for the G7 summit, thanked the French President Emmanuel Macron for his warm welcome. Sharing a picture with President Macron on his social media platform, the Prime Minister expressed his gratitude for the hospitality extended to him upon his arrival. And DD India's Shubhendu Ghosh now joins us from Avignon, France, for more updates. Shubhendu, what are the main points, of the leaders' declaration on the mutually beneficial international partnerships?
Hello, Mark. The most significant part is to look at the global economy and the pressures that the global economy is going through at the moment, given especially the pressures on the energy supply chain that is taking place due to conflicts in different parts of the world, particularly West Asia and also Russia and Ukraine. There is, of course, a certain optimism around the fact that a peace deal has been announced by United States and Iran, which is likely to be signed very soon as perhaps 19th of June. Those are some of the important aspects. The idea that France, the host nation, has is to expand the influence in a more consolidated fashion of the G7 nations, especially with the partner countries like India. India being one of the fastest growing economy in the world, significantly representing a significantly large population. Also the inroads that India has made in the domain of clean energy, digital innovation. Those are some of the ways in which the G7 countries want to expand their partnership and influence across the world, and therefore partnership with countries like India becomes very, very significant. Other than that, the declarations focus on what you just mentioned, different health concerns and emergencies, Ebola in a more urgent manner, and cancer treatment and cooperation over best practices over a greater period of time, a more coordinated and consolidated approach by global community as a whole.
Right, Shubhendu. Also, what's expected from Prime Minister's bilateral engagements on the sidelines of the G7 summit?
Those are of great interest, Mark. The bilateral schedule today happened to be with the leaders from the United Kingdom, from the UAE in particular, but there are also sources inform us a likelihood of a bilateral meeting taking place between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Donald Trump of the United States that is likely to happen tomorrow local time, and that would be of great significance. Remember, the last time the two leaders met and talked in an official environment was in February of 2025. So it's a long gap for two thriving democracies and economies who partner greatly in diverse areas for the leaders to engage, and therefore lots of important issues would be in focus. Areas of concern would also be discussed by both the leaders. Of course, there is a negotiation that is underway as far as US-India trade deal is concerned. So a lot is expected if that bilateral takes place between Indian Prime Minister and the American President. Mark?
Right, and also, Shubhendu, India continues to be the voice of the aspirations of the global South, and as a bridge, between the North and the South, and this is really the platform. And we saw that really working very well when India was the chair of the G20 in 2023. To what extent, is this continuing since then and visible at this G7 summit?
Absolutely. That's a very, very significant aspect of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's participation in this edition of the G7 to share the concerns of the developing world, of poorer nations with the developed counterparts. There is no better platform than the G7, where the most industrialized, economically prosperous nations gather to discuss the role that they can play in global geopolitics and shaping the global economy. This is the platform where those concerns will find perhaps more effective mechanisms to address the challenges that are faced by the global community, but in particularly the global South. And Prime Minister, therefore, also as the chair of the BRICS grouping in 2026, India's voice becomes very, very significant in representing the cause, the concerns, and the voice of the global South.
Also, Shubhendu, with regard to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, that is an aspect that will obviously also be an important issue from the European point of view. But India, of course, what kind of role can India play as a credible bridge? India acts as a bridge between the global North and the global South. Also, in terms of peace measures, always asking for diplomacy and dialogue. And we can see that India has a good relationship with Russia to a large extent. And you did mention India's current status as the chair of BRICS.
Absolutely, Mark. India has been always in the favor of diplomacy, that talks and diplomacy must solve the conflicts that the world is ailing with. The battleground is not the place. Military solutions do not last. That's the message that Prime Minister has reiterated on various global platforms. And once again, here in this G7 summit underway in France, the Russia-Ukraine conflict is also taking a center stage in a significant manner. There's also a moment of the G7 representing mostly the Western countries, of course, Western economies, also alongside them, Japan, but most of them have a very clear perspective that they take as far as Russia-Ukraine conflict is concerned, putting their weight, influence, and resources behind Ukraine in this conflict in particular. At least 6 out of the 7 G7 countries are very clear where their loyalties lie. So in that sense, the manner in which India's message of diplomacy, India's message of putting peace efforts first is going to be significant for the leaders to address. They already are grappling with the concerns emanating out of West Asia. Russia-Ukraine conflict deserves to end. It's been over 4 years that this conflict has been dragging on, significantly impacting geopolitics and geoeconomy. And if long-term solutions are to be found as far as economic challenges facing the world are concerned, and this is what the priority of the G7 countries is, finding a speedy and a long-term resolution of the Russia-Ukraine conflict is absolutely important.
We leave it there. Thank you very much, Shubhendu Ghosh, for joining us from Avion. Now, still to come here on DD India News Hour. The Ukrainian President Zelensky says that the G7 is united in the view that Russia is not winning the war. And Elon Musk's SpaceX to acquire AI coding company Cursor for $60 billion.
Delhi recorded 0 good air quality days in 2025. Here we track AQI levels almost like weather update.
Coal mines in India are obliged to monitor air quality in the area around their operations, including within a 3-kilometer radius of where people live.
Greenhouse gas emissions must go to zero as fast as possible. Obviously, there have been weather extremes, and protection against these extremes has not been perfect in the past either. So climate change is really just amplifying the risks and introducing some new risks that have not been present in a particular region thus far.
The beauty of olive tree, it's very, very resistant. And I believe it will resist for so many years to come and to adapt to climate change.
You're watching DD India News Hour. I'm Mark Lynn. On the second day of the G7 summit in Evian-les-Bains, which is in France, global leaders turned their focus to the pressing geopolitical and economic challenges that the world faces, from the conflicts in Ukraine and West Asia to the security of critical supply chains. Discussions highlighted the urgency of coordinated international action. Rahul Upadhyay has a report.
Diplomatic engagement and global security dominated the second day of the G7 summit in Evian-les-Bains, France, as leaders of the world's leading economies intensified discussions on the conflicts in Ukraine, West Asia, as well as broader geopolitical and economic challenges. Hosted by French President Emmanuel Macron, the summit brought together leaders of the United States, Britain, Canada, Germany, Italy, and Japan. Leaders from invited countries including India, Brazil, Kenya, and South Korea also joined deliberations aimed at strengthening international cooperation. Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi proposed a G7 joint stockpiling collaboration initiative on critical minerals, highlighting the growing importance of securing strategic resources. She also underlined the need to ensure uninterrupted maritime commerce through the Strait of Hormuz, a key route for global energy supplies. Economic security emerged as a key outcome of the summit, with Canada and Italy advancing cooperation in the critical minerals sector. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney announced agreements involving Italian companies for graphite and lithium projects.
Just flag a few things. In the past few months, we've signed a couple of very important critical mineral deals, which was one of your priorities from minute one, both with E&I on graphite and in lithium with Met Developments. We have making progress on defense cooperation. We're making progress on space cooperation. We're making progress on helping to make the world a safer and more prosperous place. So I'd just like to thank you.
The two sides also explored opportunities for cooperation in defense and space.
No, I want to thank you. I'm really proud to have this occasion again to talk, and I'm proud of the leadership of this Prime Minister in Canada. For obviously we've got a long tradition in our cooperation.
Expanding the summit's diplomatic outreach, G7 leaders were joined by Arab leaders for a dedicated working session on the evolving security situation in the West Asia. On the sidelines, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer met European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen for talks on security cooperation, economic resilience, and support for global stability initiatives. As the summit enters a crucial phase, leaders are seeking coordinated responses to global conflicts, securing critical supply chains, and strengthening international partnerships, reinforcing the G7's role in addressing today's most pressing geopolitical challenges. Rahul Upadhyay's report for DD India.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi is visiting the French capital Paris on the third leg of his France visit. What's in store for Paris on Wednesday and Thursday after the Prime Minister's successful engagements in Nice and Evian? Here's Gautam Roy's report.
Prime Minister Modi is going to be visiting Paris, the French capital, on the third leg of his France visit. Already, as far as Nice is concerned, he's had bilateral engagements with French President Emmanuel Macron, taking India's ties with France forward in multiple strategic fields. He's also put out a strong message of India's ability to innovate at Bharat Innovates in Nice. And again in Evian, he's put forth, while attending the G7 meeting, India's message about how the global south needs to be further integrated and taken along with the developing nations, resolving all the global issues that challenge humankind today. In Paris, he will, of course, be again putting India at the forefront of the global innovation ecosystem while taking...
Well, we are getting in visuals coming in from Avion. This is a bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Prime Minister Carney of Canada.
The negotiations, but also with the exchanges of our universities, cultural exchanges of our businesses, including the largest trade delegation from India, and a big reciprocal one coming from Canada to India, is that there's so much more to do together, and it's just one objective which you've set is to double our trade by the end of this decade. We think we can do more, and with this partnership.
एक्सेलेंसी, मेरे लिए खुशी की बात है कि हमारी पहली मुलाकात भी G7 में हुई थी और आज हम 1 साल के बाद मिल रहे हैं। और जैसा आपने कहा, हम 4 बार मिल चुके हैं और लगातार फ़ोन पर भी हमारा संपर्क हो रहा है। हम बायलैटरल रिलेशंस को लेकर के भी और अंतर्राष्ट्रीय परिस्थितियों के संबंध में भी खुल करके अपने विचार रखते रहे हैं और हमने एक अच्छी परिस्थिति में एक मित्र देश के रूप में बहुत प्रगति हो रही है। भारत का डायस्पोरा की आप जिस प्रकार से चिंता करते हैं, मैं आपका बहुत आभारी हूँ और भारत के डायस्पोरा के प्रति उनका भी कुछ न कुछ योगदान आपके यहाँ हमेशा रहता है। ऐसे आपको सही है कि हम फ्री ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट को लेकर के बहुत ही उत्सुक हैं और शायद जैसा आपने मुझे निमंत्रित किया है कनाडा आने के लिए, मेरा भी प्रयास है कि इसी वर्ष में आऊँ और मेरे आने से पहले ही हम इस एग्रीमेंट को पूरा करें। हम टेक्नोलॉजी के अंदर बहुत कुछ आगे करना चाहते हैं। एनर्जी सिक्योरिटी में कनाडा हमारा बहुत बड़ा पार्टनर बन सकता है। तो ये सारे क्षेत्र हैं जिसको लेकर के आज हमारी काफ़ी चर्चाएं भी होगी और मैं आपका बहुत आभारी हूँ कि सबसे साथियों से आज मुझे मिलने का मौका मिल रहा है। थैंक यू।
More comments. The G7 in Kananaskis in Canada, and thank you for honoring us with that visit. Right from the start, you've set a high bar for the relationship and what we can do together. Very pleased and very honored by your reception of me a few months ago. Of course, be honored to reciprocate a visit to Canada. We are making very good progress. On fait de bons progrès en ce qui concerne notre partenariat économique compréhensif, our CEPA partnership. To be clear, His Excellency likes a deadline. I like one as well. And our deadline is to complete by the G20. Our teams are aware of that and what we're discovering in the negotiations, but also with the exchanges of our universities, cultural exchanges of our businesses, including the largest trade delegation from India, and a big reciprocal one coming from Canada to India, is that there's so much more to do together, and it's just one objective which you've set is to double our trade by the end of this decade. We think we can do more, and with this partnership.
एक्सेलेंसी, मेरे लिए खुशी की बात है कि हमारी पहली मुलाकात भी G7 में हुई थी और आज हम 1 साल के बाद मिल रहे हैं। और जैसा आपने कहा, हम 4 बार मिल चुके हैं और लगातार फ़ोन पर भी हमारा संपर्क हो रहा है। हम बायलैटरल रिलेशंस को लेकर के भी और अंतर्राष्ट्रीय परिस्थितियों के संबंध में भी खुल करके अपने विचार रखते रहे हैं और हमने एक अच्छी परिस्थिति में एक मित्र देश के रूप में बहुत प्रगति हो रही है। भारत का डायस्पोरा की आप जिस प्रकार से चिंता करते हैं, मैं आपका बहुत आभारी हूँ और भारत के डायस्पोरा के प्रति उनका भी कुछ न कुछ योगदान आपके यहाँ हमेशा रहता है। ऐसे आपको सही है कि हम फ्री ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट को लेकर के बहुत ही उत्सुक हैं और शायद जैसा आपने मुझे निमंत्रित किया है कनाडा आने के लिए, मेरा भी प्रयास है कि इसी वर्ष में आऊँ और मेरे आने से पहले ही हम इस एग्रीमेंट को पूरा करें। हम टेक्नोलॉजी के अंदर बहुत कुछ आगे करना चाहते हैं। एनर्जी सिक्योरिटी में कनाडा हमारा बहुत बड़ा पार्टनर बन सकता है। तो ये सारे क्षेत्र हैं जिसको लेकर के आज हमारी काफ़ी चर्चाएं भी होगी और मैं आपका बहुत आभारी हूँ कि सबसे साथियों से आज मुझे मिलने का मौका मिल रहा है। थैंक यू।
Well, that was the meeting, a bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Prime Minister Carney of Canada. Those were the initial statements that they made. And Prime Minister Modi said that, of course, they continue to meet on several occasions and have constantly been putting their views forward at international forum with openness and freedom. And then he also said that they have met 4 times, and that was what Prime Minister Carney had also mentioned. And the Prime Minister thanked him for his views on, his how he has looked after the diaspora in Canada of India. And they did refer to also to the free trade agreement. Of course, there's a target. Prime Minister Carney has said that that should be done by the complete by the G20 summit. And of course, apart from the free trade agreement, Prime Minister talked about several sectors that they should cooperate on, which is the tech sector and the energy sector, which they want to take forward. Moving on with our program now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is visiting Paris on the 3rd leg of his France visit, where he'll also be addressing the Indian diaspora in a key European nation. Gautam Roy has sent us this report from the venue.
India has been deepening and enhancing ties with France at the diplomatic, trade, investments, almost all levels, including cultural and people-to-people. And as has become trademark, Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be interacting with the Indian diaspora in France here during his Paris visit as well. The Indian diaspora in France is about 120,000 strong, but if you include the French overseas territories such as Reunion Island, Martinique and Saint Martin, it becomes 350,000 strong, and they're very well integrated into the French society. Their presence here goes back decades, and they're from the previous colonial history of France, apart from coming in from states like Tamil Nadu, Punjab and Gujarat as well. They are professionals, they are academicians, well integrated into French society. Indian culture is very well known here, be it its traditional dances and its music, its cuisine too. Yoga is very popular here. International Yoga Day is coming up on the 21st of June, so that will be a big context for the French too. Apart from so many other things that Indians bring to the table, being India's ambassadors in France, and Prime Minister Modi will be talking about that as well, and how India has been deepening its engagement with not only France but every corner of the world where modern tech is concerned, economic endeavor is concerned. Everything will be talked about, and the Indian diaspora has a key role to play. That will also be something that the Prime Minister will emphasize right here at Salle Pleyel. This is the venue, can accommodate about 2,000 people, and it will be packed to the rafters when Prime Minister Modi is here in France. With camera person Yogesh, Gautam Roy, Paris, DD India.
Well, the US and Iran are set to sign a breakthrough accord at in Switzerland. This is going to happen on Friday, paving the way for the talks on a final agreement. While the deal could lead to sanctions relief and also the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, major differences remain over Iran's nuclear program. Rabindra Chavan has our report.
Diplomatic momentum is building between Iran and the US after both sides announced a memorandum of understanding designed to end months of conflict across West Asia. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says a new round of negotiations is expected to begin on Friday, with discussions focused on Tehran's nuclear program and the lifting of Western sanctions.
In the first phase, we will negotiate issues related to ending the war, the Strait of Hormuz, the maritime blockade, the release of Iran's frozen fund, reconstruction, and other matters connected to these topics. The aim was to reach a memorandum of understanding on these issues and then negotiation to continue for 60 days in order to achieve a final agreement. Under the final agreement, decision will be made on a nuclear-related issues and the lifting of sanctions.
Iran says its chief negotiator Mohammad Baghir Ghalibaf will attend the signing ceremony, while the United States will be represented by Vice President J.D. Vance. US President Donald Trump has indicated he may also attend the event. Despite differences on Iran's nuclear program, Trump says the interim agreement delivers on Washington's main objective.
I'd like to get a formal setting first before we do that, but I have no problem with that. It's grid document. Here's what it says. Iran will never have a nuclear weapon. That's what it says. It won't have one. To buy, to develop, they will not have a nuclear weapon. And I would say that's about 99.9% of what I wanted.
Meanwhile, the International Energy Agency welcomed the reopening of Strait of Hormuz, saying unrestricted access through the strait is critical to ending the energy shock caused by months of disruption.
Single most important solution to this problem is the fully and unconditionally opening up of Strait of Hormuz to shipping. And I very much hope that these efforts among the countries will lead to fully and unconditionally opening of Strait of Hormuz as soon as possible.
Markets have already responded positively. European stocks extended gains, while oil prices fell further on expectations that Gulf shipping will soon return to normal. Meanwhile, Qatar, which helped mediate the negotiations, says it's cautiously optimistic the agreement can lead to broader regional security and stability.
We are cautiously optimistic that the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding will lead to next phase of regional security through the talks that will take place on the nuclear program and on other issues relating to regional security.
While the memorandum marks a significant diplomatic breakthrough after months of conflict, negotiators now face a critical 60-day period that could determine whether the interim agreement evolves into a lasting peace deal. Ravindra Chauhan's report for DD India.
And this breakthrough agreement is due to be signed in Bergenstock in Switzerland on Friday. Our next story, the European Parliament gave a final sign-off on Tuesday to a tariff deal with the United States as the EU seeks to close a volatile chapter of transatlantic trade relations. It has been a long time coming. The EU and the United States clinched the agreement in July last year, setting levies on most of the bloc's products at 15%, while Brussels agreed to zero tariffs for US industrial goods. But the US President Donald Trump's, to his chagrin, in fact, the EU had yet to fulfill its side of the bargain after Trump's threats to Greenland and a US Supreme Court decision striking down many of the tariffs fueled months of delay. So the biggest forces in Parliament, including the Conservative European People's Party, to which EU chief Ursula von der Leyen belongs, they've endorsed this agreement. Some 440 EU lawmakers backed the deal, with 151 against and 50 MEPs abstaining during the vote in the Parliament that took place in Strasbourg. This, there are now only formal steps left. So this ends that particular process. There are formal steps left. A final rubber stamp by member states is expected in the coming days or weeks perhaps, and publication in the EU's official journal is going to take place for that to take effect. And now going back to our story on India's voice at the G7, we are joined by Ambassador Dr. Mohan Kumar, former Indian ambassador to France. Thank you very much, Ambassador Mohan Kumar. Now, how consequential is India's participation this year, given its role, a valued partner of G7, and also the current BRICS chair, because BRICS has Russia, Iran and China as members?
Well, thank you very much for having me. This year is special because, as I was saying in another program, that this G7 summit is the most geopolitical summit that I can think of in recent times. They have taken it upon themselves to deal with two issues. One is an existential issue for Europe, and that is the issue of Ukraine. You have got the Ukraine's president there, Zelensky, who is going to meet with the G7, and the G7 will hear him out as to what is going on. Second is the deal, as you said, which has been concluded, well, we will see on Friday, but I'm told electronically it has been signed. And so we have this deal on Iran. Both these are geopolitical issues. They are not economic issues. And you will recall that, Mark, that G7 was initially established in the wake of the 1973 oil crisis to actually deal with macroeconomic issues. But it's a sign of the times. And to me, the main reason why G7 is having to deal with all this is also because there is a tremendous failure on the part of other institutions in dealing with geopolitical issues. So if you take the UN Security Council, it's not doing much. G20 is too big, and some of the other plurilateral groupings are simply not stepping up to the plate. So this has actually given the G7 a new lease of life. 5-10 years ago, we were talking of how G7 was fading into irrelevance and the G20 has replaced the G7.
Right.
What I see in today's summit is that the G7 is back in the game, except that it is now dealing with geopolitical issues.
Right.
And since the Iran issue is so existentially important for India as well, because of the Strait of Hormuz, I am particularly happy to see our Prime Minister participate in this summit.
Dr. Mohan Kumar, so you did mention serious geopolitical tensions, but there is also economic uncertainty. There are rapid technological shifts taking place. So how crucial is India's participation, particularly in being a voice of the Global South?
I was just going to say, because the Prime Minister has said twice that when asked by the press as to how you will approach the G7 summit, he has made it abundantly clear that we are going to be the voice of the Global South. So that is one thing that India can be trusted to do. And particularly since both these conflicts, the conflict in Ukraine and the conflict in Iran, both had unintended consequences for the countries of the Global South. The Global South had nothing to do with these two conflicts. They did not start these two conflicts. And yet, the impact of the conflict in Ukraine has been on fertilizer and food. And this has led to massive food insecurity in Africa and so on. And again, this closure of Strait of Hormuz, in which the Global South countries had nothing much to do with, again has impacted the energy security of countries of the Global South. It's a double whammy. You have food insecurity coming from the conflict in Ukraine, and you have energy insecurity born out of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. So I cannot tell you how important it is for a country like India and our Prime Minister to be there and put across this point of view that it is in the abiding interest of the countries of the Global South that both these conflicts come to an end, that we have a solution to the problem in Ukraine, and we have reopening of the Strait of Hormuz as early as possible.
Dr. Mohan Kumar, also, is this, there's a likely meeting between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi. Is this an opportunity then for President Trump and Prime Minister Modi to reinvigorate US-India ties? This is their first meeting in over a year. So, and who's the onus on actually to consolidate, let's say, the economic ties to start with?
I think, frankly, I look forward to only one outcome. And that is, if the two leaders can agree that, listen, we should have the trade deal done now and push it across the line, because the negotiators are having huge problems in trying to do this. Every month I keep hearing it's 90% done, it's 99% done, and so on. But I think we need to get this out of the way, because that has had a profound negative impact on the relationship. So I would say that primarily what I look forward to from this interaction is to get the trade deal out of the way. And if they can also have a conversation, particularly on defense, tech, and energy. In terms of gas, United States has become the largest supplier of natural gas to India. So energy, transactions are undergoing a very important shift, and we need to talk about it with the United States, especially since India believes in energy diversification, and we need to meet the energy needs of 1.4 billion people. So I would say trade, energy, and tech will be the main issues that need to be discussed by the two leaders, get some problems out of the way so that the relationship can be brought back on rails.
So India has signed free trade agreements with the UK and the EU, and both are members of the G. So what can the Prime Minister do to solidify or to enhance trade with them?
Well, to begin with, the United States has stopped believing in free trade agreements. The US does not sign FTAs. So what we will be signing with the United States is just a bilateral trade agreement. And this agreement, hopefully, will make sure that we are able to take the US-India relationship to the next level. 500 billion is a target that these two countries have set for themselves. And I hope that can be achieved sooner rather than later.
Indeed, India is also making advances on the semiconductor front with fabs and things like that, AI models as well. Well, I'll come back to you, Ambassador Mohan Kumar. We've got some shots now also of a bilateral meeting that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has just had with the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. This also happened on the sidelines of the G7 summit in Avion a short while ago. And we did say that India and the UK have signed a trade agreement which is significantly boosting trade between the two countries. In fact, the deal had eliminated tariffs on 99% of Indian exports to the UK, and India cut tariffs on about 90% of British goods. Then there was also a double contribution convention. Both nations signed a treaty ensuring temporary Indian workers in the UK and the British workers in India do not have to pay dual social security contributions. And investment is the second, India is in fact is the second largest foreign investor in the UK, so a very important relationship. And Indian companies employ more than 100,000 people across the UK. Of course, the relationship is very strong in areas of defense and technology, education, mobility now, climate and energy, and diaspora and cultural ties have also significantly strengthened the relationship, because the diaspora is nearly about 1.9 million people, and they play a crucial role in binding the two cultures together. Professional mobility has been also on the rise. Thousands of professionals and young graduates allowed to live and work in either country, including in the India-UK professional scheme. Let's go back again to Dr. Mohan Kumar. Now, India is, as I said, making advances in these fields of semiconductors and AI models and all that. It's also a part of the Pax Silica, and we had that AI Impact Summit in Delhi earlier this year. So what can Prime Minister Narendra Modi's bilateral talks with a lot of these countries, we just saw two of them, Canada and the UK, these are considered high-income, high-technology-driven powers. What's it going to yield in terms of investment in AI, chip technology and the like?
So one of the advantages of being an outreach country, you know that India is not a member of the G7. But the G7 has always invited India, and this is the 13th time, and the Prime Minister himself, I think, has been attending this meeting for the 7th time or so. So one of the big advantages is that you get to meet the leaders of the G7 on the margins of the G7 summit itself. So I understand the Indian Prime Minister has met not just the Canadian Prime Minister and the UK Prime Minister, as your photographs showed, but also the leader of the UAE. And that is important for India as well. But to answer your question, I think when we meet with these leaders, the primary concern these days tends to be economics because of the closure of Strait of Hormuz, the war in Ukraine impacting the economies. So the main concern seems to be economic, because India is reckoned as a fastest growing economy, a big economy, and therefore countries like Canada, UK, etc., set great store by their economic and commercial and trade ties with India. And in that context, India's primary focus from these countries has been to attract investment. And one of the areas where we would like to attract investment, as you rightly point out, is in the area of AI, the semiconductor chips, and so on. Of course, the US meeting will be terribly important from that perspective, the one the Prime Minister will have tomorrow. But Canada and other countries have big investments. The Canadian pension funds, for example, have significant investments in India. And with the UK, we've always had a good investment relationship. But I would say with countries like France, India is trying to shape the rule in AI, trying to have a third way, if you like, not going the American way where the state doesn't play a role, not going the Chinese way where the state does play a role, perhaps too predominant a role, and then have a third way with regard to artificial intelligence, which was announced by the French president and the Indian Prime Minister at the AI summit in Delhi. They called it AI with trust. And this is what I think India is trying to do. And the India-France Year of Innovation, which has been announced as 2026, and you know that the Indian Prime Minister participated in Bharat Innovates in Nice, and tomorrow he will be on to Paris, where he will be participating in the biggest tech show in Europe, which is called Viva Tech. So in all these, I think it's also a question of India trying to put its best foot forward to attract as much investment as possible for data centers and for investment in semiconductor missions.
We leave it there. Thank you very much, Ambassador Dr. Mohan Kumar, former Indian ambassador to France and well-known international affairs expert. Thank you for breaking that all down for us, helping us to understand India's voice at the G7 summit. Now, the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney and Prime Minister Narendra Modi had met on the sidelines of the G7 summit in France a short while ago. Both leaders had reviewed the excellent progress made in bilateral engagements and also discussed ways to build a stronger partnership driven by trade, energy, innovation, education, and people-to-people exchanges. Speaking on the growing partnership, the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, he said that the relationship between the two nations has been built on a strong foundation from the outset, enabling both countries to expand cooperation across multiple sectors.
Right from the start, you've set a high bar for the relationship and what we can do together. We are making very good progress. On fait de bons progrès en ce qui concerne notre partenariat économique compréhensif, our CEPA partnership. To be clear, His Excellency likes a deadline. I like one as well. And our deadline is to complete by the G20. Our teams are aware of that and what we're discovering in the negotiations, but also with the exchanges of our universities, cultural exchanges of our businesses, including the largest trade delegation from India, and a big reciprocal one coming from Canada to India, is that there's so much more to do together. And it's just one objective, which you've set, is to double our trade by the end of this decade. We think we can do more and with this partnership.
Well, over the past 12 years, the Narendra Modi government has placed a strong emphasis on cultural heritage, spiritual centers, and civilizational identity. From Ayodhya and Kashi to Kedarnath, Dwarka and Kanyakumari, several initiatives have sought to restore, redevelop and reconnect India with its cultural roots. Our next report looks at the key highlights of India's 12-year journey in the realm of culture.
उत्तरं यत् समुद्रस्य हिमाद्रेश्चैव दक्षिणं वर्षं तद् भारतं नाम भारती यत्र सन्ततिः.
From the snow-crowned Himalayas to the waves that kiss the Indian Ocean, from the ghats of Varanasi to the shores of Dwarka, there flows an invisible thread. A thread woven through millennia of memory, faith, knowledge and civilization. For centuries, that thread endured every storm. It survived invasions, colonialism, neglect and the relentless march of time. Yet, it waited, waiting to be rediscovered, renewed and retold to a new generation of Indians. The story of the last 12 years is for many the story of that rediscovery. Every civilization has moments that seem to gather centuries into a single day. For many Indians, 22nd January 2024 was one such moment. As the sacred mantras rose into the skies of Ayodhya and Ram Lala was consecrated in the Grand Ram Mandir, millions stood still. Lamps flickered in homes across India, eyes filled with tears, hearts remembered. It was not merely the consecration of a deity. It felt as though a civilization had completed a long pilgrimage and finally arrived home.
राम भारत की आस्था है, राम भारत का आधार है, राम भारत का विचार है, राम भारत का विधान है, राम भारत की चेतना है, राम भारत का चिंतन है, राम भारत की प्रतिष्ठा है, राम भारत का प्रताप है, राम प्रवाह है, राम प्रभाव है, राम नेति भी है, राम नीति भी है. ये भव्य राम मंदिर साक्षी बनेगा भारत के उत्कर्ष का, भारत के उदय का. ये भव्य राम मंदिर साक्षी बनेगा भव्य भारत के अभ्युदय का, विकसित भारत का.
The lamps of Ayodhya illuminate the path to Kashi, the eternal city, where time itself seems to pause before the sacred waters of Ma Ganga. When Narendra Modi arrived in Varanasi in 2014 as a parliamentary candidate, he spoke words that resonated deeply across the nation.
संकट मोचन की सारी शक्तियां जहां अपरंपार है, वो भूमि, उस भूमि की सेवा करने का मुझे सौभाग्य मिला है और मेरा मन कहता है मैं आया नहीं हूं, मुझे भेजा भी नहीं है, मां गंगा ने बुलाया है.
Those words were not political, they were civilizational. Along the ghats where saints, scholars, poets and seekers had walked for thousands of years, the Kashi Vishwanath corridor emerged as a bridge between heritage and modernity. Today, devotees can walk from the sacred Ganga directly to the abode of Vishwanath, experiencing not merely a temple visit, but the living continuity of a civilization that has endured for thousands of years. Beyond the banks of the Ganga lies another sacred center of India's spiritual legacy, Ujjain, the city of Mahakal, where time itself bows before the divine. The Mahakal Lok corridor transforms the ancient precincts of Mahakaleshwar into a magnificent cultural landscape. Towering sculptures, sacred motifs, and grand avenues now tell stories once confined to scripture. Here, mythology breathes and heritage speaks. From the city of Mahakal, the journey rises to the Himalayas, where India's spiritual traditions have long found their highest expression. High above the clouds, amid silence broken only by mountain winds, emerged an unforgettable image. Prime Minister Modi seated in meditation inside a cave near Kedarnath. It was more than a photograph. It was a reminder of an ancient India whose sages sought truth not in palaces but in solitude. Nearby stood Kedarnath itself. While the temple stood firm, the Kedar Dham was scarred by the devastating floods of 2013. Through extensive redevelopment and restoration, the sacred Dham rose again, embodying the resilience that has defined Indian civilization for thousands of years. From the Himalayas, the journey turns westward to the sacred shores of Dwarka, where the memory of Krishna still lingers in the sea breeze. Through renewed national attention to its spiritual and historical significance, Dwarka once again entered the popular imagination as a symbol of India's ancient, maritime, and civilizational glory. And then, at the southernmost edge of Bharat, where three seas embrace, another powerful image entered history. On the Vivekanand Rock Memorial at Kanyakumari, Narendra Modi sat in meditation at the very place associated with Swami Vivekanand's spiritual awakening before he carried India's message to the world. The symbolism was profound. One monk had awakened India's confidence in the 19th century. Another generation was now seeking to rekindle that confidence in the 21st. That confidence traveled across oceans through yoga. When India successfully secured United Nations recognition for the International Day of Yoga, an ancient practice once confined largely to ashrams and seekers became a global celebration. Every year, millions across continents now gather to practice a gift that India has offered humanity, a path towards harmony between body, mind and spirit.
Let us use the power of yoga to build bridges of friendship, a peaceful world, and a cleaner, greener, and sustainable future. Let us join hands together to realize the goal of one earth, one family, one future.
Yet a civilization lives not only through monuments and traditions, but through connections among its people. Through initiatives such as Ek Bharat Shresth Bharat, which encourages cultural exchange between states, and the Kashi Tamil Sangamam, which celebrates the ancient bonds between Kashi and Tamil Nadu, long-standing cultural connections were rediscovered and celebrated. The message was simple yet profound. India has always been diverse, but beneath that diversity beats a single civilizational heart. The same spirit guided efforts to preserve manuscripts, safeguard traditional knowledge, share sacred Buddha relics with the world, and bring home hundreds of stolen idols and antiquities. Every returning artifact was more than stone or metal. It was a fragment of India's memory finding its way back home. And so after 12 years, what emerges is not merely a catalogue of projects. It is the story of a civilization remembering itself. A story written in the lamps of Ayodhya, reflected in the waters of Ma Ganga, echoed in the chants of Mahakal, whispered by the winds of Kedarnath, carried by the waves of Dwarka, and illuminated by the spirit of Vivekanand at Kanyakumari. For many, this has been more than governance. It has been a cultural renaissance, a renewed effort to reconnect modern India with the wisdom, faith, confidence, and continuity of an ancient civilization. A civilization that was never lost, only waiting to awaken once more. Bureau Report, DD India.
Well, that's all we have in this edition of DD India News Hour. Let's know your thoughts on the news of the day. For those of you on the go, get the latest news and updates from India and across the world on the DD India mobile app. It's available on both Android and iOS platforms. Scan the QR code and download it now. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. My name is Mark Lin. From all of us here in Delhi, thank you very much for watching DD India News Hour. Namaskar.